Today's video is brought to you by the free-to-play multiplayer game Enlisted. If you're a gamer, you'll know that historical shooters have definitely come back into vogue in the last 4 or 5 years, and Enlisted, which was launched in 2021, is quickly becoming one of the most popular games in the space. It's got a strong focus on historical accuracy while still keeping gameplay dynamic and fast-paced. Personally, I like games in a genre that build the mechanics around history, and that's exactly what Enlisted does. You could play distinct historical campaigns like the invasion of Normandy or the Battle for Moscow. Each campaign has unique maps, troops, weapons, and all kinds of various historical details to unlock and play in. Enlisted has a lot of elements from online shooters that you probably enjoy, like large-scale combat zones, vehicles, specialized weapons, but it also has some cool elements that are unique, like the ability to construct fortifications to assist your team in real time on the battlefield. And naturally, there's full customization of your soldier. Naturally, Enlisted is available on PC, also Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, as well as Xbox One and PS4, and everything is fully optimized for cross-platform support. And also, it's free to play. So go to enlisted.link/side projects enlisted to get started. And as a special treat, you guys can follow that link and you will get 3 days of premium play for free, plus several orders of troops and weapons. Very cool, check it out. And now today's video. Whenever mummies are mentioned, most people think of Egypt, but in comparison to China, their efforts are basically human jerky. Squishy organs were removed, and natron, a type of salt, was used to dry out the body in order to prevent decomposition. The results are shriveled, fragile, and brittle. Mummification of this type did occur in China too. However, ancient morticians also experimented with a few other methods which were remarkably successful and created so-called wet mummies, which is a lovely image. Instead of being removed, the internal organs would be left in the body. As they'd hold a lot of moisture, decomposition would have to be prevented either with the use of a bacteria inhibitor and cell-fixing liquid formaldehyde style, or by starving the bacteria of oxygen and killing them that way. One wet technique, also known as the sticky rice soup method, again, lovely, was used in the Song and Ming dynasties in China to preserve a number of bodies, including the wife of a bureaucrat found in the Sun Xinjiangji Mu tomb in the Jiangsu province. Apologies for my Chinese pronunciation there. I know this video is going to be a bit of a mess. Fortunately, despite what the names might conjure up in your mind, the mummies were not found floating in a hearty broth. Instead, the graves were sealed using a mixture of lime, clay, sand, and sticky rice water. This would make them airtight, causing bacterial death and impeding decomposition. The Lady of Dai stands out amongst all other mummies as she was never dehydrated nor sealed with soup and is all the better for it. Her 2,100-year-old body is so well preserved that you'd be forgiven for thinking that she died last month as opposed to last millennia. Her skin is soft, supple, and plump. Her joints are flexible and unaffected by rigor mortis. She has hair, eyelashes, even nose hairs. Her autopsy team even discovered type A blood in her veins and a last meal in her stomach. If they'd had mobile phones in 150 BC, you'd be able to unlock it because she still has her fingerprints. The astonishing level of preservation has led some to claim that she's not a mummy, but actually a cadaver. But following the broad definition that a mummy is any body which has had its soft tissue preserved, either intentionally or accidentally, most are happy to put her in that category. Either way, she's given archaeologists an incredible glimpse into life during the Han Dynasty, and her fantastically opulent life in particular. As you may have guessed by the fact that great care was taken to mummify her, she was no peasant. Her name was Xin Zhou, the Lady of Dai, a noble who was the wife of the Marquis of Dai, Li Kang, and she was a very, very wealthy woman. Reportedly a great beauty in her youth, she lived the good life with parties, music, and feasts. Her tomb was stuffed with over 1,000 artifacts, all preserved in extraordinary condition and providing an incredible insight into the life of a Chinese aristocrat. She had 100 silk garments designed for all seasons, 182 pieces of lacquerware, including cups and wine jugs, makeup and toiletries to keep her wet mummy looking its best, and 2 figurines of servants and musicians to provide for her party guests in the afterlife. All these luxuries have since earned her the title of the Diva Mummy, the original party girl. Of course, all good hosts feed their guests, and those who buried her made sure that she was ready to throw a banquet. Sealed with her in her tomb were several dozen pots containing a surprising array of gastronomic delights. She had what you'd expect: strawberries, dates, plums, venison, hare, and beef, but Lady Di was a woman of extravagant tastes. So, of course, no feast would be complete without a helping of turtle dove, crane, dog, and owl. A world away from the wheat, millet, and soybeans the common people would be eating at the time. Her body reveals that she paid for her lavish appetite in several ways, and it ultimately led to her death. Uncomfortably, but not fatally, her exotic tastes or poor hygiene at the time affected her with not one but two intestinal parasites, as she shared her delights with both tapeworms and whipworms. She also carried around many gallstones, which would have caused a great deal of pain and discomfort. She was unlikely to have been able to work off the excess calories due to a fused spinal disc, which would have been debilitating and required her to walk with a cane at the relatively young age of 50. This sedentary lifestyle, combined with her fatty diet, led to obesity, coronary thrombosis, a blood clot in a blood vessel of the heart, and arteriosclerosis, a condition where the arteries become clogged with fat. These conditions would have caused pain and discomfort, and various treatments for angina, including cinnamon, magnolia bark, and peppercorns, were found in her tomb. The lady spent her last hours in the summer eating a large portion of muskmelon, as proven by the 138.5 seeds found in her stomach. Unsurprisingly, with her cocktail of conditions, it was a heart attack that killed her in the end. This shocked experts at the time, who, until her discovery, mistakenly believed diet-related heart disease was a modern affliction, or at least not one that's over 2,000 years old. In the Western Han Dynasty, it was believed that the soul was imperishable and that you would live on in another world after the body died. Burials were therefore elaborate and designed to ensure that the person would have all they needed in the afterlife. Filial piety, the Confucian virtue of honoring your elders, was important at the time, and what better way to show your respect than by providing for your parents with a lavish life after death? Of course, during the Han Dynasty, this wasn't as easy as buying good flowers and paying extra for the hot options at the buffet. It took years of planning and the enormous undertaking of constructing and stocking a fitting tomb, not to mention the pressure of choosing the right method of mummification. Do you go for the traditional brain hooked out through the nose dehydration technique, or do you risk it and attempt the experimental wet method? It would be great if your mum could make it all the way to the afterlife with all of her organs, but is the risk of her ending up as a festering soup worth taking? Fortunately, in this case, it's likely she had some say in the decision. Her husband and a 30-year-old man, who was possibly her son, had died before her and were buried in tombs nearby, and morticians had attempted to preserve them in a similar way. Unfortunately, workers managed to damage their tomb while building shinjuis. This broke their airtight seals and allowed water to damage their bodies. Had this not been the case, 3 incredibly well-preserved mummies may have been recovered from the site rather than one. To prepare for a burial, she would have been gently washed, but not much more needed to be done to the body itself. Then she was dressed in her funeral attire and wrapped tightly in 20 layers of silk. It's likely that the silk played a major part in keeping her body so perfectly preserved. There were so many layers it formed a cocoon around her, suffocating the bacteria and preventing her decomposition. Next, she was placed in a series of 4 elegantly decorated coffins that nested within each other. She was discovered in the innermost one, along with 21 gallons of unidentified colorless liquid. No other coffin contained any liquid, and debate still rages about whether this was purposefully added during her burial, produced by bodily fluids, or had seeped in from the surrounding groundwater over the course of 2,000 years. Once she was safely locked away in her layers of coffins, they were placed in her burial vault along with her valuables. Then the whole thing was surrounded with 5 tons of moisture-absorbing charcoal and encased in 1 meter of watertight white clay. This is where she remained for the next 2,100 years. While I'm sure she would have preferred to remain undisturbed, especially after surviving the grave robbing and looting years that left her unlucky husband without a number of his possessions, it wasn't to be. During 1971, the Cold War was in full swing and tensions were high. China feared attack, and its citizens were bombarded with slogans such as "dig deep holes, accumulate grain, and don't seek hegemony." On the back of this advice, a hospital near Changsha in Henan province instructed workers to dig an air raid shelter in the side of Moangdi, a hill on the property. The story goes that once they'd tunneled 30 meters, they noticed the dirt beginning to crumble and sat down for a cigarette break. However, as they lit up, air seeping from the ground caught alight, and the sparks from their matches burst into bright blue flames. Terrified, they fled to local officials to report the Gi-ho, or ghost flames. Another version of the event describes them reaching the clay layer and drilling through it. They noticed a stream of air escaping and decided to light it to see what it was. Of course, it was pure methane caused by the decomposition without oxygen, and a jet of blue fire was sent cascading over the nearby workers, badly burning them. The truth probably lies somewhere between the two. Workers found clay, broke through, and tested the air with a match, but what's the fun in that? Appetites at the time were small for archaeological discoveries, and a team was dispatched to excavate the site with minuscule funding, around £644 in today's money. With an enormous amount of clay and charcoal to be removed, progress was incredibly slow. Fortunately, help came in the form of 1,500 high school students who were drafted in to do the heavy lifting, and proper excavation work finally began in 1972. The work was hard. Mud, rain, and dodgy scaffolding hampered efforts, but the teenagers were keen. Ho Liang, director of the excavation team, recalled some would use their hands to dig, and they were left bleeding and covered in splinters from the bamboo baskets used to carry the dirt. After nearly a year of painstaking work, the burial chamber was finally reached. It was covered in bamboo matting, each bearing the Chinese character meaning family or home. The next job was to deconstruct the 6.7 by 4.9 meter wooden chamber and remove the pots containing Jin Zhou's feast. As one worker lifted the lid of a pot, he exclaimed, "Look at that." It revealed a broth with perfectly preserved slices of lotus root floating, still intact. Of course, as with all excavations of ancient tombs, once exposed to the air, everything starts to quickly disintegrate, and the lotus slices sank and disappeared before their eyes. Eventually, her coffins were removed by crane and taken away for experts to open. The team extracted coffin after coffin, each decorated with colorful images and mythical creatures, until they reached the Marchioness. She was lying in 75 centimeters of clear liquid, which quickly oxidized and turned brown once exposed. She was also encased in her cocoon. While the ancient silk still looked beautiful and held its original shape, it had rotted and formed a soft mass. It had to be cut away from the body. This might not sound like too much of a problem, but remember, this was a wet mummy. The stench was incredible, and the silk took a week to remove, with each worker having to endure the terrible odor as they slowly cut away each layer. Once her body was revealed, everyone was stunned. No mummy had ever been found in such pristine condition. The images seen today don't do it justice, as deterioration began as soon as she was uncovered. Initially, it was difficult to find someone willing to conduct the autopsy. Then Premier Zhou Enlai told experts not to touch the ancient treasures unless they could be certain they wouldn't destroy them. To do so would disrespect their ancestors, and the scientists were scared of the repercussions. Eventually, a junior scientist, Peng Longjiang, volunteered. He later explained his decision with the expression, "Newborn calves are not afraid of tigers." Fortunately for him, the autopsy was successful. Not only did he manage to extract all of her organs, including her brain, shrunken but intact, he also managed to establish her cause of death, the heart attack. Footage of the autopsy shocked scientists worldwide. Never before had they seen a mummy whose limbs could be bent without snapping and whose organs remained in the exact location that they'd been when the owner died. Instead of months of MRI and CT scans being used to build a picture of the insides of a dried and brittle body, this one was being sliced open like a regular cadaver. Surprisingly, even though we know more about her than almost any mummy uncovered, a mystery does still remain. Scientists have still not been able to figure out what the coffin liquid was or exactly why she was so well preserved. Some strongly believe that the liquid was just water that had seeped into the grave and it played no part in the mummification. This would make some sense as she lay below the water table and both her husband and potential son's tombs had water damage. Others, however, are unconvinced, as it doesn't explain why the innermost coffin contained the liquid, why it turned brown, or why it had a different chemical composition to the other tombs. Frustratingly, we don't know exactly what the liquid is. Scientists have figured out that it's slightly acidic, which could indicate that it was used for antimicrobial properties, but beyond that, they've got no idea. This leaves the question, did Xingzhou's morticians successfully develop a preservation fluid that could keep a body intact for thousands of years? If so, did they use it on anyone else, or was it more of a throw spaghetti at the wall sort of thing and see what sticks? If only they'd passed down the recipe, as since she was extracted from her tomb, she's been slowly deteriorating. Efforts have been made to lengthen the preservation. In 2003, scientists at the Henan Museum developed a secret compound that they've been injecting her with in an effort to keep her body intact, but she's definitely beginning to look worse for wear. What the substance is hasn't been revealed. Perhaps it's something similar to the plastination process currently used to preserve bodies for medical research, where fluids and fats are replaced by special plastics. Regardless, we're sure the treatment is available for a few $1,000s in Los Angeles. So I really hope you found this video interesting. If you enjoyed this archaeology-based one, why not check out the video that I'm linking to on the screen now? Great other archaeology video that you'll enjoy if you enjoyed this one. Check it out. Thank you for watching. Thanks again to Enlisted for sponsoring today's video. Remember, you can go to enlisted.link/side projects enlisted to start playing their free MMO shooter with 3 days of premium play and some bonus troops and weapons. That link is down in the description box below. Go check them out, and thanks for watching.